off the internet or you need to go back for any reason, we'll have a recording of it as well. If you are using phone audio, please make sure that you're entering your participant ID. We will be breaking into small groups today, and if your video is not connected to your phone, you won't be able to participate. So I'll
hey, Krista, could I jump in just a second? So we have one person with us that is dialing in from 616-304-1786. This message is specifically for you. If you can enter in your participant ID so it connects it with your window, that would be fantastic. Again, that's 616-304-1786.
Okay, so I think this is directed to them, how to do it. So to connect the phone to the video, click the arrow, I'll say it slowly, click the arrow next to the mute button, and then open the phone audio window and scroll down to find your participant ID. If you couldn't find that, enter pound, your ID pound on your phone, and then you should be connected. Okay. So let's also take a moment and review some call etiquette, okay? So please keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking. Also use the chat box to submit questions or comments down at the bottom of your screen. There's a chat box. If you need assistance at any time, send a message directly to Katie Hop. You can do a private message or a message to everyone. So if you send something to her, she can help you out. So that's the logistics. Let's get started on our full agenda.
Good morning. I'm Brandy Lovelady Mitchell. I'm an APC co-chair and the 4th through 12th grade work group co-chair. Today, we've invited Teresa Weatherall-Neal, former superintendent of Grand Rapids Public Schools, to say a few words on behalf of KConnect's Board of Trustees.
Okay, you guys, I just had to unmute my phone. I want to say good morning and welcome. This is a large chunk of time, and as a Board of Trustees, we appreciate you coming together to share this morning with us. You guys, we are in very uncertain times in the world, and Kent County is no different. It isn't just about COVID. Unfortunately, COVID happened, but the idea of race relations. Right, we have been working on this with KConnect now for quite some time, looking at all of the areas around data. And I just want to commend everyone here on the Zoom call, because we started before we are here, where we are here across this country in Kent County. And so that happens because of the collective talent of people on this call, that we started looking at this idea of race and systemic change before this unrest. It's not a surprise to anyone where we are today in this country, in this world, because we need systemic change. I think KConnect, the group, APC, those of us that are on this call, unfortunately we're not together, but I think we are to be commended for taking a look at it. And an example is the work that's been done around the homeless community. It is absolutely amazing. For 2 years we took this heavy lift, so we are a lot farther down the road than most communities, and that really is what KConnect is all about, is looking at data, making systemic change. And I think for all of us that are in this room, and some that are not, I think we have to just really applaud what the efforts that we have done. You know, when COVID happened, it was a way to just shine the light on the inequities in this country, in this community, and not just Grand Rapids. It is across this world. And we may not have created this issue with race, but we've all participated, me included. And I think that now we have to say, we're going to embrace change, but with speed. And how can we do that? One is embrace the change, invite those to the table that may not have had a voice, right? We can do that. And when you invite them to the table, listen. We need to listen to each other and really respect what people are doing. And I think that, again, we can look back to what we've done these last couple of years around the homeless change we've listened to people. We didn't come in with the answers, and I think that is the way to do it, to embrace the data, continue with KConnect. We have to continue to fight. But you guys, I'm gonna tell you, as a Black female, it's not gonna be easy. We're gonna make mistakes. We are gonna make mistakes, and we need to have those honest, hard conversations and give people grace. Ask questions, but what we can't do is take 2 or 3 years. This change is gonna happen. It's gonna happen. And we can either be a part of the change or we can be affected by the change. But I think that having honest relationships, honest conversations, and not quick to judge, ask those questions that you want to ask people. Find a safe place to change the narrative. And I think that really is what KConnect has been doing. We said we would embrace data. We came together to remove those barriers for marginalized communities. And that was years ago. So again, we were already on this road, but you guys, I'm gonna tell you, we are at a fork in the road now where we've got to make a difference. We need to ask ourselves, are we up for the task, right? And if we have our colleagues, our friends who may not be, help them. Don't talk about them. We all have to learn from each other. We have to do it with speed though, because this is not going to go away. After COVID, after this social unrest, we can't go back to what we thought was normal because it wasn't okay. It wasn't okay. And so we have to continue on this road right now that we're on with KConnect and create our new normal. And then I just want to say, you guys, we are Kent County. Listen, we have taken on some heavy issues in this community, heavy issues, and we can do it again. But we do it by staying at the table, allowing people to ask questions, ask how I feel, right? And then not make judgment about it. I think being flexible and the ability for us to shift, let people in and have a seat at the table. I think that is going to make all the difference in the world as we continue, right? Let's continue to create strong allies, but even those that we don't see as our allies, let's bring them to the table and listen to them as well and give them a voice. I commend all of you from the APC. I have shared and I've seen work that I've never thought I would see in Kent County around the homeless program. That has it has really made a huge difference. And I think that you guys are to be commended. Continue to push each other just as you did. Continue, and we will make a difference. We have a couple of folks that are with us today. And one is Dallas Lanier. He is a great friend, Pastor Dallas Lanier, just a great friend. And he has been doing some work around these social issues. And so we've asked Dallas to join us. And then we have some other folks that will join a little later, and that is people from the Michigan Policy. They're going to talk. But I want everyone to just keep an open ear, and the Board of Trustees as well. You know, we want you guys to have a voice, but we also want you to truly hear and feel what people are talking about, because their reality is the real reality. It is real. And so again, I just want to commend you on behalf of the Board of Trustees. I thank you for taking this time to spend with us, and let's continue to learn and continue to fight for change in Kent County. Dallas, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Good morning. And thank you to Mark, to the KConnect board and staff, all of you who are on this call. It's great to be with you virtually this morning. And as Teresa stated, we've been doing some work now in regards to bringing about positive change here in Kent County. And I want to share with you a little bit of what that work is. And so, Katie, if you're able to bring that up, that would be great.
Did you want to quick do the APC values before we go right into Dallas's presentation, Krista?
I'm sorry, was I supposed to give that back to Brandy or someone, you guys?
All good. You just told us to be flexible.
I'm a little old, you guys.
We can be flexible.
We are flexible.
We can be flexible.
Yeah. And I will gladly step in and bridge the conversation to Pastor Lanier. I am so grateful for Superintendent Neal in acknowledging the heaviness on our hearts and minds about all that's happening and her invitation for us to level up in terms of being congruent with our words, intention, and action. And so before we get into the presentations that we have scheduled today, we just want to take some time to thank some of the people and the partners. And so I do want to pause and let Katie tee up those tiles. And so as we think about thanking the people who make up this group that is dedicated to action, we have to acknowledge our work group co-chairs, and you'll see the names of those individuals on the screen. So please take time and eyeball them, and when you get an opportunity, thank them for their work. We also want to take time to thank our great facilitators. So again, please eyeball their names on the screen. The Housing Stability Alliance. I'll give you a little more time to read all of those names. We also have our Board of Trustees. And last but not least, we want to thank our backbone team. Thank all of you for what you do to make this collective work impactful in our community.
Absolutely. Can't thank all of those people enough for their participation and their engagement. You all will be assigned a table captain for today's meeting. They are here to answer questions and to guide you through today's process. We encourage you to chime in. We need to hear everyone's voice, fully participate in the upcoming discussions.
So let's review APC's role and cultural values. First, our role. The APC is the only place that the entire network gathers for perspective seeking and feedback gathering. Second, our cultural values. Number one, yes and. We promote a culture of improvisational affirmation, allowing the yes and principle of improv comedy. In your APC role, try to express what would make your reaction to an idea more positive. Try not to say no. Number two, experimentation. We have plenty of environments where it's dangerous to expose a proposal until it's fully developed. The APC is not such an environment. Everything we do is somewhat experimental, and admission to failure or setbacks is an asset. This is a context for got it, not gotcha. Number three, accountability. Accountability simply means groups must give the APC an account for their plans, which we affirm. Number four, decision rules. We use low pressure decision-making methods to reinforce the values and culture we seek. And lastly, listening. Listening is essential. We encourage all of you to listen well to one another during this meeting and beyond, in work groups and one-on-one conversations. Krista?
So, yep, let's review what was accomplished the last time we were together at our November APC meeting in person. We heard from the Board of Trustees on becoming stronger systems leaders. We reviewed and gave feedback on our KConnect values, which was a very robust conversation. We heard an update on the housing security work. We experienced a gallery walk, very impactful on student loans and housing insecurity. And we heard and gave feedback on the Kent College and Career Success Network proposal.
Thank you, Krista. So our agenda for today's meeting includes hearing from Pastor Lanier from the Black Impact Collaborative about their work in the community, learning from the Michigan League for Public Policy around identifying racist policies and considering future budgetary concerns resulting from COVID-19, hearing from the Housing Stability Alliance on their common agenda and roadmap for housing security and using the APC voting protocol to affirm it, hearing an update from our prenatal to third grade work group about ongoing work in the early childhood space, and After the meeting, please stay with us to wish KConnect's first president, Pamela Periot, well as she moves on to another role in our community. You can find all of today's meeting information, including the slides, pre-reads, and forms at the link listed on the screen. It is also in the chat box.
In advance of today's meeting, you should have received some pre-read materials, including the Black Greater Grand Rapids COVID-19 position paper, the Housing Stability Alliance overview, and the prenatal to third grade work group update. If you did not receive these materials, please private message Katie Hopp in the chat box and she will send them to you now. You can also find them in the link that was just shared. Was it just shared? At this time, I will like to introduce, actually before I introduce them, can we just remind everybody to please connect your phone and the video. I think there's still a person or two that won't be able to participate if your phone and your video is not connected. Okay, at this time, I'd like to introduce Dallas Lanier to share more about the work of the Black Impact Collaborative. Dallas, now you can do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad for that interruption there. That was great information. I'm glad to see all of those names. Many of your faces I had seen and identified you as friends and colleagues from different interactions throughout the years here in this community. So again, thank you for inviting me and inviting the Black Impact Collaborative to be a part of this conversation today. I too commend KConnect on its work. Excited to hear more during today's meeting. So let me make sure that we honor our time, setting my timer here. I want to talk to you today about the Black Impact Collaborative. And Katie, if you'll go to the next, thank you. So in his book entitled Toxic Charity, Robert Lupton discusses two responses that charitable organizations take when seeking to serve their community. One of those responses is a crisis response, and another is a chronic response. He makes the point that crisis situations call for crisis action. So providing direct care and meeting immediate life-sustaining needs. The Black Impact Collaborative has coalesced out of this COVID-19 crisis to do just that. However, Lupton also makes the point that organizations then have to adjust their strategy when responding to chronic, recurrent, long-lasting needs. And although the BIC is a response to this current crisis, we're also forming with the long-range scope of responding to the systemic inequities that have resulted in the current inequitable health outcomes in the Black community because of COVID-19. We know that systemic disparities for Black people in Greater Grand Rapids were really pre-existing conditions to COVID-19. And so we want to address those conditions. And so we, as the BIC, are together for COVID-19 and beyond. As you see on this slide here, it's just a visual to illustrate how we've come together. We called together Black-led and Black-serving organizations in this COVID-19 moment to discover and illuminate the unique needs of Black Greater Grand Rapids around COVID-19. We knew that our partner organizations were already doing great work on the ground, but we also knew, just as KConnect knows, that when you bring together people who are powerful in their own corners and they begin to work together, that it increases the effectiveness of that initiative. And so the Institute of Ubuntu, which is a think tank, which had been doing some work in the background, convened this group. A lot of the names you know and the organizations you know, they are historic organizations as well as pioneering organizations doing great work in this community. We held our first meeting on Saturday, April 25th, and the group is made up of 27 individuals representing 21 organizations. Excuse me. And although we don't claim to speak for all of Black Greater Grand Rapids. We are confident that the breadth of the BIC offers a substantive and collective voice that reflects a number of common experiences within the Black community. The nature of our work is this. We seek to gather information on what leaders are hearing and seeing as they do their individual work. And we also are concerned about how they are positioned and responding to the crisis. When I say they, I'm referring to the leaders and the organizations that make up the BIC. And then we also want to identify what is the nature of their immediate and ongoing needs. Go to the next slide, please. So you all have received the BIC position paper. Hopefully you will soon have time to read it all if you have not done so already. But within it, you will discover that the BIC has identified 7 impact areas that we feel are priority in Black Greater Grand Rapids in light of COVID-19. I'll briefly highlight each, and then you'll have an opportunity to see them all in detail in the paper. The first impact area is to establish a Black Impact Collaborative COVID-19 Response Fund for Black Greater Grand Rapids. So that response fund will do a number of things. Partially, the focus will be on food assistance, on rent and utilities, providing PPE and supplies, and other immediate needs. In particular, as we're providing food assistance, we want to make sure that we're doing so in ways that are culturally relevant and providing the Black community with food that they normally use. And also, as the end of this rent moratorium inches near, we will also seek to mitigate evictions, which would further exacerbate the problem of homelessness, which I know KConnect is working on. In providing PPE, we will be looking to contract with Black-owned businesses who are making PPE. And we will help families with burial costs when COVID-19 claims the life of their loved one. As I mentioned that, I recall a conversation I had with a colleague many, many years ago who said that she didn't understand why, when someone lost a loved one, that other people around them gave them money. And that floored me because I understand that not only in the Black community, but particularly in the Black community, many people are living paycheck to paycheck. And when unforeseen crises and emergencies happen, they are not financially prepared to handle that. And so finances are absolutely a need. And so we want to make sure that as people are grieving, that they are not also hurting because of financial pain. The second impact area is developing a responsive communications platform for Black Greater Grand Rapids. We want to create a resource hub that is for us, by us, which in this hub will provide information from trusted institutions that make up the BIC. But we're also looking to gather concerns and stories from Black people. I remember just as COVID-19 was starting and growing here in Michigan specifically, there was a story out of Detroit, a woman who worked at a hospital there for nearly 30 years and was close to retirement. She became ill and they sent her home because of COVID-19 symptoms. She then returned to that same hospital seeking emergency services and was turned away 4 times, dismissing her symptoms. That woman shortly thereafter died. And I can't help but forever wonder, had she been treated as she should have, would she still be with us today? Those are the types of stories that the BIC wants to be able to identify immediately and respond to with its collective voice to the powers that be. So in fact, beyond this initial website that we seek to create, the next step will then be to create a hotline that provides two-way communication to both receive those stories and concerns, but also to help navigate the myriad questions and resources in our community. The third impact area is ensuring the health and well-being of Black Greater Grand Rapids. According to the Kent County's dashboard, the 49507 zip code had the highest number of COVID cases. But 3 months into the pandemic, there were no testing sites in 49507. We found that to be unacceptable. And so the BIC is pushing for testing site expansion. We're working now with the county on establishing a testing day. We're also pushing for PPE for businesses, for contact tracing, and also for support for mental health services. The fourth impact area is ensuring economic security for Black Greater Grand Rapids. Many of us remember the 2015 Forbes article, which ranked cities where African Americans are doing the best. Unfortunately, Grand Rapids fell all the way down to the bottom of that list. We were ranked 51 out of 52 cities. And as you may know, that ranking was based on 3 factors. It was homeownership, entrepreneurship, and median income. So what that Forbes article tells us is that where Black people are not doing well economically, we are not doing well. And COVID-19 is only making it worse. So the BIC will work together to stabilize economic security through a creation of a Black chamber or a chamber-like entity. We will also advocate with municipalities to waive or defer summer property taxes for businesses. And we're also looking to create a fair lending alternative to payday loans. Many of you know of my work with Project Green, the Grassroots Economic Empowerment Network. We've sort of built our brand around fighting against payday lending. And so Project Green is working currently with churches to establish a faith-based alternative. And BIC Project Green being a part of this team will also work to make that happen. Let me fast forward a bit. The last 3 impact areas, number 5 is ensuring positive educational outcomes for Black children and youth of Black Greater Grand Rapids. Bridge Magazine did a poll statewide and stated that when it came to student achievement, over half of African-American parents were extremely concerned compared to just 1/3 of white parents, again, regarding student achievement due to COVID-19. The BIC is interested in unearthing data that helps to identify the source of this gap in perspective. Why is it that Black families feel this way and their white counterparts do not? So we want to know from school districts, for example, did you provide one-to-one devices for distance learning? Did you provide hotspots? We also want to ask tuition-based programs, will there be a refund? We want to ask school districts, what professional development for teachers have you provided or are you providing to ensure distance learning skills, particularly as we now look to return to school with potentially a hybrid format being what we experience. The 6 impact areas around incarcerated and returning citizens. The state of Michigan has approximately 40,000 prisoners. Almost 41% of those are Black, even though Black people are only 14% of the state's population. Many of us know the historic inequities that lead to those numbers. And also, Michigan has some of the highest lengths of stay in prison throughout our country. And then with those extended stays, it results in an older incarcerated population. So all of this is really leading to a high risk for COVID-19. So the BIC is calling for protection of incarcerated persons, removing them from unsafe sites, as well as providing PPE. We want to eliminate costs for phone calls so that at the bare minimum, incarcerated persons can communicate with their family and support networks without barrier. And we also are calling for the release of nonviolent persons. The last impact area is around our elders, ensuring Black elders are cared for, safe, and protected. The Office of Minority Health reports that Black people are 60% more likely to be diagnosed with diabetes. Also, Black people are 40% more likely to have high blood pressure, but less likely to have it under control. And so factors like these and others put our grannies and pawpaws in harm's way in this age of COVID-19. And we really cannot have that as the norm. So the BIC will work with its member organizations and with area agencies to ensure that the needs of our elders are met, particularly around resource navigation, PPE, and supplies like thermometers, so that people are able to monitor their own health. If you go to the next slide, please. And so just want to share just a couple of BIC wins. The BIC is about both action and advocacy. Our member organizations are already doing action, but we also know as we come together, we can advocate for change in each of these 7 areas. And so we've had some wins already in these 2 months that we've been gathering. And so what you see here, as you heard me say earlier, that in 49507, although it had the highest number of cases of COVID-19, there were no testing sites. Well, on the first Saturday of this month, we changed that. And so in partnership with Cherry Health, thank you so much to Tasha Blackman and her team, we were actually able to provide testing in 49507. And so that day we did 161 tests, and that was 3 times more than what Cherry Health would normally see on a regular day. Beyond that, we've also, as I mentioned, been working with the county. The county has purchased PPE for businesses. That was partially due to BIC's advocacy and request. They're expanding testing sites, and they are committed to a testing day, and we are working closely with them on that. Go to the next slide, please. That's the 161 there. You all hopefully saw my fancy animation. This is an opportunity for BIC to collaborate with KConnect as we do this work. As I mentioned earlier, the BIC's first phase of work is around this crisis response, and all 7 impact areas are built with that in mind. And so as we do this work, we would love to receive some data share from KConnect, particularly around food distribution, ensuring that those entities that are providing food are doing so in an equitable way, and ensuring that the Black community is being served. Also, as jobs are being created and as people are returning to work, we want to also receive data from the KConnect that's answering the question, how many of those are going to Black people, and are those needs being met? Beyond that, there's a further call to action that includes the BIC, the KConnect, this entire community, as we look at those chronic needs, those pre-existing conditions that created the inequitable outcomes that we're currently seeing. And so the BIC will have its eye on things like removing barriers to healthcare. How do we create a living wage? How do we protect Black bodies? How do we increase home ownership? How do we open the doors to access to banking? So I'm excited about conversations Mark and I have already begun having in that regard. How do we increase business ownership and create public policy that is equitable? So I'm looking forward to hearing more from the Michigan League of Public Policy. Representation is so important in every sector, and so we will be monitoring and pushing for that as we have these conversations throughout the community. So I'll pause there and be happy to, well, let me hand it back to you, Mark, or Katie, or you all tell me who I'm handing it back to.
Thank you, Pastor Lanier. Let's hand it to co-chairs, Krista and Brandy.
Yes.
Okay,
so thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the MLPP is not going right now, Mark? We're going into housing?
No, Michigan League for Public Policy is next.
Okay, so we will have Jamie Vosovic, right, from the Michigan League from Public Policy, give us a little bit of our journey towards equitable policy. So, Sorry
Good
about that.
mor-
Welcome, Jamie.
No problem. Good morning, everybody. As stated, my name is Jamie Vasovic, and I am the Community Engagement Specialist with the Michigan League for Public Policy. A lot of what I do is working in the West Michigan area, making sure people get our data and information, working with people on advocacy, their advocacy plans, and then, again, helping them with whatever their needs are in that way. So obviously, there's been a lot going on right now. First thing I want to say is we are not experts in racial equity by any means, but we're certainly on that journey. We've been working in it for quite a while. And so today we're really going to take a look at, first off, who is MLPP, kind of our journey as we've done internally and as we look at policy. So next slide, please. Great. Oh, I'm sorry, go back. Thank you. If you could go back one, Katie. Sorry. So we've been around for over 100 years, about 108 years. It was started by two social workers, really working to help people who are experiencing poverty and those in the criminal justice system. We have been mainly just data for a long time. And so we would often do reports, kind of hand them to the legislature and kind of say, okay, here's the data, here's what it says. So I would say in the past 10 years, we've really started to come, okay, so here's the data, here's what it means, and here are some ways we think we can improve the outcomes for people. And so we really work to do that through policy change. And within those past 10 years, as we've gotten more advocacy, we realized that racial equity is at the heart of what we need to do and how we need to go about doing it. We cannot address the disparities that we're seeing unless we address racism. And a lot of that's enshrined in public policy. And so it's very near and dear to us. Next slide. So the areas that we work on are education, healthcare, budget and tax, basic needs, immigration, social determinants of health, jobs and economy, some criminal justice work. So we have policy analysts that work and research these things as well. And so there's someone dedicated to that area as well. Next slide. The other area that we are in is Kids Count. So Kids Count project is a national project through the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And so the Michigan League for Public Policy is in charge of doing all of that data for Michigan. And our profiles were released April 29th, so if you haven't checked those out, please do so. And actually our Kids Count director is a Grand Rapidian, Kelsey Purdue. And it's through our Kids Count project that, again, we're looking at outcomes for children and families. We're looking at the inequities as well. Data is disaggregated by race. And we're also trying to look at more of, we've done that through our work at the League. But in the Kids Count, we hadn't done this before, and really looking at those systematic barriers that have excluded families from traditional pathways to health and economic prosperity. We know there's backstories to those, so we're trying to address those more, and in our profiles, we'll also start to see policy recommendations as well, and some policy wins that we've had in there. So that's a little something different from the previous profiles. Next page. And so as we've done this journey, as we started to go, I love this quote, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so we have to be brave. We've got to be willing to do the work. And so we knew that we needed that racial equity lens. So we needed to do the institutional work first before we could really start to do the systematic work that's needed as well. Again, it's not just the disparities, but we have to try to work to change the system as well. Next slide. So as we started to do that, we wanted to do trainings. And so we went right to action. And one thing that's really noticed, I've seen lots of statements from various organizations talking about how they're dedicated to equity and they want to do that. And that's great. We love that. It's the first step, but we need to see that action, right? We want people to take action. We want to start seeing the changes within those organizations and within our bigger system. And so it's an ongoing thing. You'll never stop doing this work. We will never stop doing this work. We're always going to have to be learning and looking at what we're doing if it's getting the outcomes that we want. So the first thing we did was starting with, or I should say MLPP did, is getting training from the Center for Social Inclusion. So getting those normalizing definitions, to make sure people are on the same page, and then working on operationalizing what it is that our goals are into how we do things. Next page or slide, excuse me. And so we do have the equity, diversity, inclusion team. And Katie, if you can go ahead and just fill that slide for me. And so the tools that we've come up with to use, one of those first things is a hiring guide. And the objectives to our hiring guide is really to recruit and hire more people of color. So that's taking a look at how are we advertising, the requirements for positions. And so we brought those down to really what's the minimum requirement that we need for that. And I think when people look at that, it's, oh, we're not going to get qualified candidates. And, you know, we're a small team. We're a team of 19. When I started just a year ago, we had 3 people of color. Now we're at 5. 2 of those people are in leadership and director's role, and 3 of us have master's degrees. So no one's not able to do their job, and you're certainly still getting highly qualified candidates. And so the second piece of that is, okay, we've got, you know, the diversity piece. We're getting people in the door, but we're looking at how we're doing that. But then also the second piece of that is, you know, making sure we have a culture that retains people of color. So making it a safe place, looking at what we're doing, making sure we're doing implicit bias training, and looking at when you add people of color, that it's a value add instead of, you know, do they have the right fit? Are they going to fit in the culture? No, hopefully they change your culture and they're adding to it and making it better. And that's how we really take a look at viewing that. Making sure our staff reflects the people we serve. We represent the entire state of Michigan, and we want our staff to look like the state of Michigan, and that includes many demographics. And again, we can't just have our staff do it. And actually, it's one thing we really noticed is that as the staff was working on this, our board was behind. And so we realized that we needed to get the board included as well. They were jumped on board. They've diversified a ton as well, and they're on board with us as well. And that's a really key piece as well. And one other thing with the hiring guide, there was one thing in there. I'm going to share a personal story, and I sometimes hesitate with this, but I think it just really goes to show walking the talk. So part of in the hiring guide is it's expected that you would push for a negotiation as the hiring agency. So when I went in for an interview, it was, we should be talking, they should be pushing like for negotiation, because we know that women tend to not push for that. Men tend to do that more. And we know there's a wage gap there. So 3 months later, my counterpart is hired, male, and I get pulled into a room. I'm thinking, oh boy, what's going on? And my pay was raised immediately. I didn't have to advocate it for it. I didn't have to find out that, oh my gosh, my counterpart is male and he's making more money than me. We do the same job. No, he advocated, negotiated a higher salary, and they fixed it on my end. I didn't have to do anything. For me, that speaks volumes. Not only were they walking out the talk, they did it immediately. How many of us are willing to fix things before they're brought to our attention? How many of our agencies would ever do that? I just think that that's really huge. And so we're talking about all pieces of diversity, equity, inclusion. So of course we have our inclusive phrasing guide as well. That's pretty self-explanatory, and it's not about being politically correct. It's about part of that, making that safe culture for people. And then our messaging best practices. One of the things that we're really working at right now is asset framing. And so actually at our last policy forum, we had Trey Bean Shorters come in and talk about that. And so what asset framing is, really we're describing a group or a community or a person starting with their aspirations and goals rather than the disparity. So many times when we start to do the disparity and we talk about it, and we're still framing people as if they're the problem. And we need to put it back to the policy. We need to recognize that they're much more than just their disparity. The same thing we do when we talk about people with disabilities. I don't say, you know, handicapped people. We don't do that. But yet when we talk about disparities, especially when it comes to people of color, we constantly do that. And MLPP is guilty of it as well. We've done that before, but we need to start reframing how we're looking at that, because it's incredibly important, and it continues to send part of that media and that messaging that frames people of color in a negative light, and that single story narrative, which then reverts back to our implicit biases of pulling people up by, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's your fault. You didn't do this. When actually we know there's larger systems at play. And so while it seems like a small thing, we really feel that asset framing is really, really important. And we are not experts in it, and we're really working on that right now. Again, we have a glossary of terms that we can continue to update within our agency. And then the racial equity policy screening tool, I will get to that in just a minute, because that's something we're developing, and hopefully you can co-create with us. The other thing is we have our maintain the equity, diversity, inclusion action plan. And so that's something that is developed also through the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And so there's 7 steps to that, from establishing and understanding that, the principles, all the way to evaluating the effectiveness of what you're doing, making sure you're addressing root causes, making sure you're gathering that data, and also making sure you're engaging populations and stakeholders. So if we're, and that's one thing with community engagement that's so important. Oftentimes community engagement will be the last piece of a puzzle. I've got this idea, we want to do this policy, and then we throw in people to fit the narrative to see that that's going to work, as opposed to starting with community. What do you need to do better, and building policy around that? And so that's part of why I enjoy my job as well, is making sure we're getting connected and hearing from people. And actually last year we did, the year before I started, we did focus groups to see what it is that Michiganders really felt needed to do better and to thrive. And then we went back last year and said, okay, this is what we got from you. Did we hear you right? Did we get it correct? Do we need to reevaluate this? And so that's something that we're doing as well. And then the other thing with Lunch and Learn. So our diversity, equity, and inclusion team meets every month to reevaluate our action plan. Where are we in it? What still needs to get done? What's missing? And constantly evaluating ourselves. And then so that's every other month, excuse me. And then in between we have Lunch and Learns, and that could be anything from, okay, is there a population that we've been excluding and we need to learn some more about to build cultural humility, because we're never going to be competent. Are we going to, or actually one of the things we did as well was asset framing. And so we did a whole session where we just kind of worked on that and built our skills with this. This isn't something extra that we do. This is part of staff time. This is paid time. Because our budget, we gotta put our money where our mouth is, and we have to pay for the trainings. We have ongoing racial equity trainings, but I've had, let's see, we've had 2 sessions, I believe, already this year. And this month we'll have another one. We're actually bringing in another counterpart consulting out of North Carolina, and we're going to go further with how we're doing. So we talked about kind of making that inclusive culture, and making it a safe space for people. So one of the things that we're going to start working on is caucusing. And so what's going to happen is when something comes up, we're going to divide out. So you're going to have a group of white people and a group of people of color, and we're going to discuss things separately. And then we're going to come together at the end, and we're going to start that process. There's actually a group out in New Mexico. So they are a lot like we are. They're another policy organization. And so after doing this for a while, they've completely redesigned their entire structure for leadership. And it's very much, everything's done through caucusing and with everybody's input beforehand. And so while there's like co-leadership, but again, everything's done through that caucusing process. And I thought that was pretty amazing. And they've done a lot of really big work on that. Not saying we're headed that direction, but that's just another way to go and another thing to do things to to continue to keep things rolling. Next slide. So the other thing we've been working on is our 21-day racial equity challenge. So this was something that we actually created last year, and we modeled it after the Food Solutions of New England. They did a 21-day racial equity challenge, and really it's to take a look at what we're doing and to do self-reflection and look at how we're doing things. And so new habit, 21 days. And so you've got 3 weeks to really kind of cultivate some self-awareness and intentionality around really understanding and confronting white supremacy. And so that's a 21-day racial equity challenge. You can do it, sign up with a group, or you can do it on your own. After a lot of the unrest that has happened, we've had a new cohort that has started, and we have had over 1,000 people sign up, including internationally, which I look at as a wonderful thing, and hoping that people are ready to really do the work and start to learn things that they haven't thought about before. So I definitely am hopeful in that as we start to kind of work at dismantling things. Next slide. So what about the policy piece? And so going back to that racial equity toolkit, you can go ahead to go to the next slide, Katie. This is something out of a racial equity tool that was out of Madison, Wisconsin, actually. And so again, we're looking at what and who, why, how are we going to look at policy? How are we going to do it so that what we do is actually helpful? And so what is the policy? What's it going to do? What data do we have to help us come to that decision and whether it's a good policy or not? What data is missing? That's going to be a really important piece as well. And who's affected by it? Who benefits from it? Who is going to be harmed by it, and looking at through that disaggregated data? Is it going to affect people in poverty, communities of color? How is it going to affect them? Why is this policy needed? And how is it going to push towards equity? And so those are all things that we need to look at. And so we've started to kind of use this tool out of Wisconsin, but we wanted to get a little more specific with it and really come up with something, I don't want to say quick, because you really got to look at stuff, but give us an idea as policy comes out and we're looking at things to, one, help us develop if we're developing policy within your own organizations, or looking at state and federal policy. Is this good? Is it helping towards equity? And so we would love to co-create with you. You know, one of the things that I really liked that was missing in this piece that I liked in the housing stability lines, they talked about root causes. Is this addressing root causes? Because if it's not, we're kind of doing Band-Aid work, right? And sometimes that's what we have to do to pass policy. Let's be realistic. There's times that we've, been on sides of policy like, this is a great start. Not quite what we want, but it's a good start. And so we go with it. But if we really want to be transformative, really looking at the policies that are doing what we actually want them to do to further us towards equity. We're all in this together, and we are not going to be thriving as a city, or excuse me, as a state, if we're not willing to lift up those at the bottom. Next slide. So taking a look at policy, obviously there's been a lot going on with the budget. And excuse me real quick, my apologies. So discretionary spending has really been down, and the economy has been growing since the Great Recession, but the general fund has not really fared well, neither has the school aid fund. And so while revenues have increased about 7.5% since then, inflation has risen 14.3%. So basically we're looking at 6.8% less purchasing power. And so the state general fund revenue has actually been below 1968 levels when adjusted for inflation, and that was before COVID. So now we've got COVID happening, and we're adding on top of that. And so what economists have been looking at after the consensus revenue estimating conference is we're looking at 6.2 billion in the next 2 budget years of a decrease. And so our budget at MLPP, we really look at that as to show what we value. It reflects our state's collective priorities and our goals. And budget and revenue are 2 sides of the same coin. So we have things that we want to invest in. We can't invest in them if we don't have money to do it. So we really it's time to have the revenue discussion. How are we going to do the things that we want to do? We haven't been investing in K-12 education. Our general fund doesn't have the same purchasing power because we haven't been investing. And so again, that revenue discussion has to come into play. Next slide. And when we look at what that does, we have a flat tax system in Michigan. And so regardless of income, you pay the same rate. But it ends up making it a regressive tax system. And so you have the lowest 20%. So if you make less than 17,600, 10.4% of your income is going to state and local taxes. When on the complete opposite end, if you're making, let's look at the top 20%, you only have 8.4 or 7.5 or 6.2% going to taxes. And so that seems like a small amount, but that has a huge increase on people's ability to purchase what they need, right? And as Reverend Lanier just talked about, people are having trouble with paying rent, getting groceries, paying gas. It's less money to do those things. And now you add COVID on top of that, and it's making those things even worse. And so again, we have a big decision to make on what we want to do with revenue. And so we at the league believe there's quite a few things that we want to do. So with revenue policy recommendations, first off is we want to make sure that the CARES fund spending are supporting those most affected. And you can go to the next slide, Katie. Making sure we're using the state's budget stabilization fund, which is the rainy day fund, and advocating for additional federal relief is a big step as well. So the CARES money that was sent in, we can't use to backfill the budget. We absolutely are not allowed to do that. So there's 2 things going on. One is the legislature is advocating for flexibility in funds that have already been given so that they can use it to backfill. And then 2, other people are also advocating for additional funding, and some other individually are also advocating for additional funding as well. So that's going to be a big thing. Michigan is heavily reliant on federal funds. We get a lot of pass-through money. So that's going to be really important with those additional funding, because I mean, that's a huge revenue. And if we don't do that, we're going to have huge cuts and across the board. And that's just going to make things worse. So the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy actually talked about, for states facing catastrophic revenue declines, asking more of taxpayers with a clear ability to pay is far preferable to cutting state budgets, which would lead to mass layoffs, steep cuts in public services, and a downward spiral in the economy. So we think it's time to have that revenue discussion, take a look at reforming Michigan's corporate tax system, modernizing the state sales tax, creating a Michigan-specific estate tax, redesigning Michigan's personal income tax. A big chunk of our general fund is actually from personal income tax. And there's also been corporate taxes that have been cut along the way too that we'd want to restore. So that goes back to some of that, reforming the corporate tax system, and reevaluating the effectiveness of tax expenditures. And maybe taking a look when we're looking at our personal tax code, whether that's adding exemptions for those with certain incomes, and just taking a look at that. And there's other taxes to consider as well. And it's not about trying to tax people to death. It's about, what do we collectively want as a whole for our state? And what are we willing to give to do it? And pooling money together, we believe, is one way to do that. Next slide. And then when looking at COVID as well. And I will just say the other thing too is, especially when it comes to funding and investment, do we want to invest in things that we can cut things? Absolutely. Or we can continue to invest. And as we're looking at investing in things, are we investing in things that are pushing equity? When we look at our K-12 funding, we know that's not done equitably. We know there's areas that need more teachers, more training, more for their students because there's other issues they have to deal with. So are they getting that extra funding? Or are we just doing it equal across the board? And so if we look at that and say, okay, that's not getting an equitable outcome, it's creating disparities, that's going to be a racist policy. So we need to change that. So just thoughts on that. And then looking at housing, one of the biggest recommendations that we have is establishing a state level moratorium on foreclosure. So the governor did extend that to June 30th, but we want to see that extended, and then also starting to build a rental assistance fund as well, because we know as soon as those moratoriums happen, those evictions are going to start piling up. And then for paid sick leave as well, I think that's one thing that COVID really brought up, was the fact that a lot of people weren't able to do that. And then there was some things passed through the CARES Act, but there were still people who weren't able to utilize that or wouldn't be allowed to utilize that. Are we allowing people to take time for themselves? And I would say beyond sick leave, are your agencies able to, do you give mental health days? Are you letting your people do that? Next slide. And then for childcare, so there was CARES funding for that. We're really thankful to see that. I think the big worry with that was that as a lot of those places shut down and only some were going to be opening for essential workers, that the funding structure for them is so tight, would they even be able to reopen up? And so the grants to cover that has been very helpful for that. And then healthcare policy recommendations, again, making sure that there's a state option to cover COVID-19 testing. Healthy Michigan has been really helpful for children in making sure, that's one strong thing that Michigan has done and has helped kids get what they need, like immunizations, things like that. We rank very well on that. And so continuing to support Healthy Michigan. Next page or slide. And the last thing I will just say was, obviously, as I talked about, Michigan being heavily reliant on federal funding, the census is going to be huge. I know so many of you are already working on, let's continue to push that. We need to get everybody counted. This is going to be crucial to make sure that we get all the funding that we need. We will lose a lot of money. I want to say it's $1,800 per person. Next slide. And so the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. I really believe public policy is a lot of way to transform things. And so I'm just going to address here where the governor's gear money is going for education. I will have to look on that. I'm not entirely sure on that. There's a lot of budget questions up in the air right now. They originally were going to have a budget discussion, or actually they were supposed to have a budget done by July, because last year, as we all know, that was a hoopla. So they decided, okay, we're going to have a budget, at least preliminary, done by July, and then we can make sure we pass it on time. With COVID happening and all of that, that's being pushed back further as well. And so there was a supplemental that was passed for CARES funding and things like that. They've been working on another supplemental for the thing before, but we don't know what's really happening, I think. And so that's being pushed further down the pipeline. But I can certainly check on that and get back with you as well. I will certainly take these questions from chat and make sure I get them out to Mark so that he can get those out to you guys. Next slide. And again, if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to connect with me. That's my cell phone number, my personal cell phone number, so you will get me wherever I am. And then you can always connect with me via email as well. We do go out to organizations and work with them. I would push for you all as foundations, as nonprofits, please get in the advocacy space. It is so, so vital. Public policy is vital. And those decisions are going to be made with or without you. So we really need to be in those spaces. If we want transformational change, we really need to go there. And again, please be a thought partner with me on making sure we're judging and looking at policy, right? Because I think that's going to be crucial.
Okay, is that it, Jamie?
Yes, it is.
I don't know the end of the slide so I don't mean
You're
to cut
good.
you off. Okay,
Nope,
good.
perfect.
So impactful and powerful, both you and Dallas, really action oriented, which is so important. And I think that's what we all need to hear. And certainly somebody like me needs to see that and what can be done. So this is really great. We appreciate it. I think we should really pause here for a minute and take some questions. Just open it up to Dallas or Jamie. If you have a question, you can certainly use the chat box, but feel free to just take your phone off mute and just ask. So let's pause for a couple minutes and see if anyone just has questions for Dallas or Jamie.
I know we have a question from Kelly Christopher from STEM Greenhouse about how does an organization become involved in the Black Impact Collaborative?
Yes, so, and I was just typing in a response to that, to Kelly, so that everyone could see. As BIC is still forming, we are in the midst of drafting what that membership structure would look like. We do know that there will be options for individuals and for organizations. We're making June 19th or Juneteenth the start of our year, and so we will be sharing more details soon about how others can get involved. And I need to share my contact information as well. I'll put that in the chat. I should add also, I believe there's contact information in the position paper as well. So, but I'll put it in the chat too.
Looks like there's an additional question from Julie. Julie, do you want to unmute yourself and speak that into the group?
Certainly. I just wondered if there are some specific recommendations, particularly with CARES and other funding coming into the state for K-12 education and equitable distribution of funding that MLPP has.
Sorry, Julie, I was just looking for that. No specific in regards to CARES funding. However, I would say in general for K-12 funding, looking at what specific districts need and making sure that there's more funding specifically with communities of color and those with a low socioeconomic status, making sure that there's more funding for them. More literacy coaches, things of that nature. And I can get you our policy brief on that as well.
That would be great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jamie, do you have any examples of asset framing that you've done at MLPP?
Specific that we have done? No, because we just literally went through a paper and tried to kind of rework how that we were doing it. So we don't have any specific examples. But if it was an example of like children in low economic or low socioeconomic statuses are prone to, you know, not graduate on time, higher amounts of discipline or whatever you want to say. And so it would starting then with children who want to do well in school are struggling because of, and then you talk about the disparity and why it exists. And that's going to be a key piece of that. So why is there a higher piece of disciplinary? Again, it also goes back to race. Why are they less able to graduate in time? What are root causes of those? So then you start to get into those pieces, and you're not going to have a deep, brief policy piece. You've got to kind of put it in a paragraph and then dig in deeper. But it starts with that. It starts with that aspiration and the dream that that kid has. So he actually talked about doing this in foundation work, because a lot of funding was geared around, the disparity, and so people would talk about that. And just how negative it felt for a lot of the children. And so he started off with, this kid wants to go to band camp and play the clarinet, and yet is struggling to do that because his parents have to work 2-3 jobs, they're not making a living wage, yada, yada, yada. You start to go into those reasons as to why. And so this kid doesn't become his disparity. And that's the big piece of that. And that's something that we're working on and through our work, because especially when we do media pieces and op-ed, because it gets to be clickbait, right? And you want that headline, and we don't want those headlines. We want to change that. And so we're really trying to be really careful. And again, this is something we just started working on, but we feel is really, really important. And we want to do a better job than what we've been doing.
Thanks.
What other questions?
Just a real quick note that Dr. Olivia Williams said, for more on asset framing, I recommend checking the Search Institute. They are leaders in the asset movement and research on youth.
I think BLE, I can put a link in there for as well. And then the other thing I would just say with that is, that's one of the things that we've talked about, putting our budget, putting our money where our mouth is we said, okay, this is something we're struggling with. We've talked about it. We know it's important. Let's spend some money and pull some people in to really help us nail and hone in on this, because we feel it's important. And that's the same thing when we look at a state and federal budget. What does our budget say our values are? And oftentimes I feel like sometimes they don't align, right? And we need to make them align with what we say our values are.
So we may have time for a couple more questions. So if you want to pose those questions to Pastor Dallas or Specialist Jamie, this is a great time to do that. So it won't be the last time that we're connected to BIC nor MLPP. And so we encourage you to continue to think about the presentations and to circle back to one of them and or the KConnect team to continue the engagement and deepening our understanding about the work they're doing and how we might join them. And at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Krista to move us along on the agenda.
Great, and thank you again for great discussion, great information. We really appreciate it, and hopefully there'll be more dialogue along the way on this. We're now going to hear from the Housing Stability Alliance on work they have been doing for the last 2 years. We're going to hear from Joe Jones from the Urban League of West Michigan, Lynn Farrell from the Fry Foundation, Mandy Bolter from the Kent County Commission, Mayor Rosalind Bliss, of course, from the City of Grand Rapids, and Christina Keller from Cascade Engineering. So Joe, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Krista, and good morning, colleagues, or as I like to say, happy hump day. I am here on this morning to talk about the Housing Stability Alliance, and in particular, really provide a little context with regards to the role that I and others played from the housing assistance community here in Grand Rapids. the beginning of the alliance is really the ending of a 2-year engagement from KConnect. And it started with a group of concerned community leaders, including myself. We wrote this letter and we informed quite a few folks that there was a crisis in the community related to increasing family homelessness. And it was adversely affecting African American Latinx families, and that our current systems that were in place, they weren't geared towards adequately addressing it. And so we asked KConnect to come into a space that was, I think it's fair to say, full of sort of significant dysfunction with regards to relationships and the system itself. There were and have been turf wars with regards to some of the to the organizations that are involved in the space. And there wasn't a lot of transparency to provide. And what they asked was, we needed, I think, some help in really trying to provide neutral facilitation and move the system into the right direction. And so KConnect agreed. They said yes. I wonder if they have at any time questioned that decision, but they said yes. And they agreed to step into a backbone role to help. And they did so by raising funds, convening community-based teams. They brought light to the disparities that we've been talking about. They brought the voice of lived experience to the table by way of Urban League of West Michigan and your Hispanic Center of West Michigan. And they elevated the conversation of family homelessness to community leaders, the business community, philanthropic partners, and the general public. It convened a design team supported by those with lived experience, experts in housing and homelessness, researchers, and communication specialists. The collective goal was to create a community plan to address the racial disparities in the system. Today, we're presenting highlights from the Housing Stability Alliance's Common Agenda and Roadmap to KConnect's Accountability Partners Council. The plan that you will see is a catalyst for change in our community. It differentiates, rightfully so, the future from the past and moves us collectively forward as we imagine a better future for us all. And so the purpose for coming before you on this morning is to ask for your affirmation and feedback related to really the key components of this community plan. And so I'll turn it over now to Madam Lynn Farrell.
Oh, madam means I'm really old. Thank you for that. So the KConnect work really is grounded in data. KConnect gathered information that was already available in the community, but analyzed it to uncover the simple truth of really what the disparities were in the work. And the results were frankly shocking. They're on your screen at the moment. The data really uncovered the disproportionate impact on Black and Brown children. And what KConnect sought to do was bring this data forward in a consumable format. KConnect also elevated the voice of lived experience through, next slide, through persona work, through profiles, videos, and in-person gatherings. And for the first time, this work identified and defined the housing system in Kent County from no housing to housing by choice, where options and control increase as one moves to the right and decrease as one moves to the left. Finally, KConnect brought in Civic Lab to introduce a common language around system building and frame the conversation around dissolving the complex problem of housing insecurity. The initiative was originally slated to end in December of 2019, December of last year, but the need for a more comprehensive community plan that focused on building a structure to implement equitable systems change became increasingly apparent and that resulted in a 6-month extension. So the movement reorganized as the Housing Stability Alliance, and the new alliance included members from the previous design team, the content team, context team, the scout team, and the communications team, and brought new members into the work as well. Civic Lab was brought back into the work to train the Alliance on critical elements of systems change. And then KConnect created a chair leadership team that is a partnership between our public sector, our private sector, and the philanthropic sector. The collaboration among stakeholders, especially those within the housing system, from our perspective has grown stronger, and we have a newly recommitted network of partners comprising this new Housing Stability Alliance. The work has elevated into the realm of elected officials and public policy, which we are delighted about. And perhaps more importantly, we have a new focus on equity, on the inclusion of people of color, and the authentic inclusion of lived experience. The work around lived experience from our perspective has gone from nice to have to a must have as we move forward. Mandy?
Hi, everyone. So I have some talking points that Mark provided, and we'll go into a little bit more data. The Housing Stability Alliance aim is to do something unprecedented, and that is to ensure housing stability for Kent County residents, but especially residents of color and families of color. The unfortunate reality in Kent County is that due to generations of racism and injustice, with increasing housing prices and low wages, our Black and brown residents are disproportionately homeless, living in hotels, doubling up in apartments, living with family. We have a link here. Let's look at some current data. I'm not sure if that's the proper link, but basically the information was put together over the course of 3 years, 2017, 2018, and 2019. Over those 3 years, there was a 37% increase in the number of people who access the system. And that's an important word, the number of people who access the system. It doesn't mean it's the number of people who got service. It's the number of people who tried to gain access and had a need. Nearly 2/3 of the increase were from children and family and adults in families. That's a really unfortunate data point. Nearly half of that overall increase was specifically from African American children and adults in families. In Kent County, African Americans make up 12% of the population, but account for 72% of those in the homeless system. When you map children coming from the homeless system, this is across the entire county. Yes, there are targeted areas, but of the 20 zip codes, 19 zip codes are represented as families needing help. The zip codes of 4907, 49507, 49503, 04, and 08 have the most children coming into the system. In 2019, nearly 1 in 6 African American children in our county accessed the homeless system, compared to 1 in 130 white children. We have talked about before, this number's not precise, but even if you played with the numbers, which I'm sure Mark likes to do, and we doubled the African American children but halved the white, it's still a 1 in 12 to a 1 in 65. So there's a clear disparity here that we need to address. 5,084 African American children and families access the homeless system. If there was an equitable homeless system and it represented our demographics, we would only show 271 African American families who needed to access the system. That's an overrepresentation of 4,813 African American children and adults in families. This shameful reality in our community underscores one point, and I'm so glad we're at this point where we need to act. We must act. We need to take action. The Housing Stability Alliance aims to disrupt the current reality for families who face this instability and homelessness. We hope to rewire the system, and we know it's a very complex system. We hope to establish new relationships and dismantle policies that lead to these adverse outcomes. Through this collective impact model, the Alliance seeks to bridge the gaps in the current local housing system so that going forward, it exists to serve the full continuum of Kent County residents, from those who have no home to those who are housed by choice. And I am turning it over to Mayor Bliss.
Thank you, Chair Bolter. Good morning, everyone. I'm really grateful to have had this opportunity over the last 6 months to work with so many amazing people on this critical work. And so I think I'm supposed to have a PowerPoint up. Is that right, Mark? Okay. Do you see it? Am I missing it? Oh, there we go. Thank you. So to give you a little bit more background, this effort was co-created by over 80 individuals, and you can see them all listed here on this slide, and they represent 60 organizations in our community. So the Alliance pulled together this cross-sector team of partners with a real specific focus on housing stability in all of Kent County. So not just the city of Grand Rapids, that's something that we've talked about for a long time. Our county is made up of a number of cities and townships and villages, and this work was really focused on all of Kent County. Its purpose is to increase access to quality, affordable housing and to truly dissolve homelessness in Kent County. And we spent a lot of time talking about what does that mean to dissolve homelessness. And then we had a focus on eliminating, a very clear focus on eliminating racial disparities among families, children, and youth. And also addressing this in a data-driven way. So the common agenda and roadmap is comprised of 5 sections, and you can see them here. At the peak of the common agenda graphic, you will see equity and community engagement. It's important to note that the goal and intent of this work is that this be embedded throughout the entire common agenda. In order to truly center this work in equity and community engagement, the Housing Stability Alliance partnered with 2 incredible organizations in our community, the Hispanic Center of West Michigan and the Urban League of West Michigan, to create a plan to empower lived experience in the future system. And I want to personally say thank you to both of those organizations and everyone that has been engaged. They have been just exceptional partners, but really critical to the work that we've done over the last 6 months. Second is shared measurement. Shared measurement system, I should say, is largely defined by a community's ability to collect data, to collect valid and reliable data, and measure results using a common set of community and program level indicators. The network is recommending the adoption of a system that includes one overall universal success measure, and then under that, 7 success measures specific to each category of the housing stability spectrum. So we try to focus a lot of time on the spectrum. This isn't about just one component of housing. It's the entire spectrum that we need to address in a very holistic and collective way. These metrics will be used to understand if housing stability is actually improving in our county. But more importantly, who is it improving for? So for whom is it improving? And then how do we coordinate action and strategy based on that data? Next was high leverage activities that maximize the efficiency and the effectiveness of the resources, funding, relationships, and the time available in order to produce the most effective and truly the greatest results. The network has identified a set of 4 core high leverage activities for is identified by the Housing Stability Alliance. Make sure I don't lose you. Am I good? All right. A backbone entity offers several critical functions that are essential to facilitate collaborative, long-lasting system change, including guiding vision and strategy for this network, supporting aligned activities, for maximized impact, cultivating community engagement, and mobilizing resources. The Housing Stability Alliance has proposed a short-term solution. We recognize that 6 months wasn't enough time to get everything done. And this is one of the areas where we're proposing a short-term solution as we move forward. So we're proposing a short-term solution for this backbone entity that would include a steering committee composed of, at a minimum, 40% people of color or those with lived experience, with a true desire to get to 60%, as well as a startup consultant to begin to really lift up the shared measurement system, communicate with the Alliance and community, and then resource the future backbone entity into the future. And then lastly, continuous communication. This is essential in order to keep both internal as well as external stakeholders informed and not but excited and engaged in the work around the Housing Stability Alliance. We need everyone to stay engaged in this work. Even though we still have a lot of work to do, we need everyone to stay at the table. And so in order to achieve these goals, a communication plan was developed to help build capacity for the Alliance around communication as they move into this next phase of work. It was created to help the Housing Stability Alliance achieve its strategic goals for communicating both the success of what's been accomplished, but more importantly, the work that lies ahead. So with that, I will turn it over to, as I said, one of our key partners in this space with the Hispanic Center, Mr. Bo Torres.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for your time. So everything that we've been doing so far is based strategically on the work of Dr. Terrell Strayhorn. His framework for the work is based on the pedagogy of empowerment. What does that mean? Our work is centered on living experience, making sure that we bring those persons to the table that have in and around experience what it means to be homeless. So the sense of belonging is what brings us to this stage of the work. What does it mean to move beyond diversity and inclusion and to truly engage persons in these high leverage activities? So utilizing the appreciative inquiry model, we look at how the Alliance will view partners that come to the table. We look at the power of stories. We utilize qualitative data to really engage our members of community. We look at language for monolingual communities, the strategies that we use. We borrow from the cultural navigation that Dr. Strahan uses, focusing on Black and Latinx males and their experience in higher education and how they belong in spaces. How do we create spaces that are not just inclusive, but engage in their work? How do we really engage with those that have been left out of these kinds of conversations? It's not just enough to bring persons to the table and not engage them in background information, really engaging in the framework. When we talk about social determinants of health, what does that actually mean? When we talk about root causes, what does that mean? And how do we engage with those populations? And I'm gonna turn this over to Santiago Gaiton really quickly to speak a little bit more about that.
Thank you. Good morning. So in speaking about the concept of cultural navigation, one of the key reasons that we looked at it was in addressing housing as a system, looking at other successful methods in other systems. So I have some background in higher education, worked there for over 12 years. So having some knowledge of Dr. Strayhorn and his work as cultural navigators, it really is, you can compare it to the idea between allies and accomplices. So accomplices walk with. So when you have somebody who walks with you, they share their knowledge, they share their insights, they share their successes and their failures, and really empower you and walk alongside you. So they acknowledge that you already have a voice, it just might not be listened to. So how do they pass along that information? And then in turn, how does that knowledge get transferred generation to generation? So it's really a powerful model to utilize, and speaking to the sense of belonging, you can really make positive change and create the system that you want to see once you have that sense of belonging. Once you feel a sense of ownership and you feel heard. So how do we elevate those voices to those key places, committees, situations where their voice can actually be heard and felt. So it's a powerful model that as Bo mentioned, really built upon some research and data from higher education looking at students of color. So it has a really great equity background already. So how do we bring that to this new system?
And as stated earlier in the conversation, by Dr. Teresa Weathers-Deal, everything that we do, we want to base on authenticity and really uplifting the voice of those that have been marginalized over the years. So we want to make sure that as we speak to the Black and Latinx experience, which this work is based upon, we really honor that and we uplift all of those voices, not only empowering, but giving to them what it is that we have lacked for so long, and that is a true voice and a true amplification of all of those social determinants which housing is a part of. So with that, I'm gonna pass it back to Commissioner Joe Jones.
Thanks, brother. I want to close with this. I know after I speak, I'll pass it on to Christina, but just to give you some idea of what our recommendations are as members of the backbone or members of the lived experience aspect of this. We are suggesting, and we've suggested as part of the plan, this idea of the creation of community coordinators. And these are individuals who would be hired to and placed in each housing organization, making sure that there's a coordinator working in each situation on the housing spectrum. Because the model that we use, that Bo spoke of, the appreciative inquiry model, it should be used to train coordinators on engagement with residents, as well as to train organizational staff on engagement with coordinators. We also talked about the importance of a common intake form and how it should be instituted, and that these coordinators can utilize it to streamline the process. We believe that coordinators must be embedded in all processes related to housing, have some real decision-making power, and have a budget to make things happen. There's the belief that there needs to be this ongoing commitment to implicit bias training for everyone in the system. That's, again, ongoing and meaningful. Something that will help employees understand and minimize the role of unconscious bias. Lastly, we must also ensure that lived experience sits at the community decision-making tables. Ultimately, the goal here is, as we look at the governance of organizations that are engaged in the housing space, there should be a number, there should be an opportunity, there should be on-ramps for opportunities for those with lived experience to sit at those tables, to bring that experience to the table, to help ultimately in the decision-making that's occurring with each respective organization. We believe this practice ensures that persons with experience with homelessness and housing instability have a decision-making role, and they're centered in the system that aims to serve them, and they provide necessary accountability for organization and system-wide outcomes. We do know, all of us who have been on this journey, as well as I believe all of you understand, that equity work via collective impact is messy, it's imperfect, while the goal of systems change is bold and brave. So we have to acknowledge the wins and mistakes along the way. So we believe that this plan sets the needed foundation for people with lived experience to be empowered in the housing system. And once the foundation is created by the Housing Stability Alliance, an additional plan of operationalizing empowerment should be considered as well. So I'll pass it on now to Christina, Madam Christina Keller.
Thank you so much. And I do want to appreciate the Urban League and the Hispanic Center so much for your role in this work and the centering force. I think it's been incredible to be a part of this. The project, which is 24 months in the making, has been working on dismantling the current structures and establishing an equitable system where people can be housed by choice. As we talked about that spectrum, it's not just about the red area of homelessness, it's about the yellow and moving more people from red and yellow to the green, which is stably housed by choice. It's building a system that rewires and establishes new ones so that the current structures are somewhat dismantled and a more equitable system replaces them. It anchors in the data, and this is so important that we stay focused on the data, laser focused on measuring and ensuring that the community is eliminating racial disparities in our housing systems. The Common Agenda and Roadmap for Housing Stability in Kent County is not a shared report and not a static plan. It's a vision and a start of a movement in Kent County. And so I do want to introduce now that voting will start. You've read the Alliance pre-read, hopefully you've received that last week. So please refer to those documents during your small group discussions. And at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Eureka People so she can lead us through the voting process. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, good morning. And thank you, Christina. And thank you to all of the Housing Stability Alliance members for your collective thought and work in developing the Common Agenda and Roadmap. And if we were together, this is a time where I would have everybody to give the Housing Stability Alliance a round of applause. But since we're not, we're going to adapt virtually. And if you can go to reactions on your screen and click the applause button or give them a thumbs up just to show some encouragement to this group for their dedication over the last 2 years, that would be a wonderful show of appreciation. So thank you for doing that. So now we're going to begin the KConnect decision-making protocol, where we're going to get your feedback on the recommendations of the Common Agenda and Roadmap. And as Christina just mentioned, remember that you were sent a pre-read copy of that, so you can pull that out during your small group discussions. So the feedback and the voting is going to occur over 3 rounds. Round 1, we're going to break you up into small groups, as I just mentioned, where you're going to have a preliminary discussion and a group vote. Then we're going to come back for a full meeting-wide discussion, where your questions and comments will be addressed by the Housing Stability Alliance. We're going to go back for round 2 into your small groups, where you will have a final group discussion and a final group vote. We'll return back to the large group, and then round 3 will conclude with an individual vote. We want you to recall that your voting is based on your ability to say yes to 4 affirmation statements. And the 4 statements are: 1, I have a general understanding of what is being proposed. 2, I think it aligns with the KConnect vision. 3, I think it supports a commitment to equitable outcomes. And 4, I am comfortable promoting it to others. Table captains have been assigned to guide you through your group conversations. Table captains, please be certain to document your group's feedback in the Google documents that you've been given. And if you should have any questions or problems during your group facilitation, message Katie Hop, who will be available to assist you. Groups, you will now have 15 minutes for your conversations to ensue, and you will begin now. So we'll see you back here in 15 minutes, and we hope you have a vibrant conversation about the Common Agenda and Roadmap. Have a great conversation. Support the recommendations with refinements. If your group voted red, it means that there are no refinements that could be made to affirm or support the recommendation. Table captains are going to be preparing to enter your votes into the chat box now. So at this time, we want to ask that only the table captains use the chat box. So only the table captains will be using the chat box at this time. So table captains, if your groups voted green, please type green in the chat box now. Table captains, if your groups voted yellow, please type yellow in the chat box now. And if your groups voted red, please type red in the chat box now. And Katie, just as a check, are you pulling up a chart or are we going to go ahead and proceed into the meeting-wide discussion?
We're going to go ahead and proceed. At the end, we'll have a chart for individual voting.
Okay, all right, sounds great. Okay, so I believe all of the table captains have voted, and feel free to scroll through the chat box, everyone, if you want to see how the groups voted specifically. So in our meeting-wide discussion, we especially want to hear from the yellow groups and the red groups. We want you to be able to share your comments and your questions or your comments that the Housing Stability Alliance can address in order to earn your affirmation or strengthen your affirmation. And we want you to be mindful not to repeat a comment or a question that another group has already shared. And so if you do hear something that resonates with you or that you support, we want you to use your chat box. It's a great tool, or you can use the reactions to indicate a clap or a thumbs up. In this time of discussion, if your group voted green, feel free to jump into the conversation at any time and share why your group may support the recommendation in order to facilitate the conversation or to support a yellow group's understanding as well. So again, we'll open it up now for the yellow groups to ask the Housing Stability Alliance their questions or to share with the Housing Stability Alliance their comments in order to get that addressed. We'll have about 25 minutes. We hope for a very robust and vibrant dialogue, and so we'll start now. So anyone, please feel free to start a conversation with the HSA.
Hi, everybody. This is Emily Aliman McAlpine. I can go ahead and jump in if that's okay. So we voted yellow, and not a lot of questions, but some concerns around providing a family sustaining wage for the coordinators, that we felt that was very important and needed to happen on the onset. And then ensuring that sustaining the work and keeping the work a priority to move it forward was also a concern. And then not having a major player at the table. You know, we're hopeful that they'll embrace the work, but you know, making sure that those major players are at the table. And then also that there was a lot of work with the scope of work was very large, and those no backbone organization to just keep it moving. So again, yeah, that's one of the reasons we voted yellow.
I can jump in, Katie. This is Heather. Our table was also yellow. It was interesting because at our table we had representation from the work group that worked to move this along and had significant depth of knowledge. And then there were other of us that were very new to the work, and I think we were trying to wrap our heads around the complexity and the number of issues that this system needs work in. So I think our group just had a lot more questions about what this would look like in practice, what this would look like as far as timeline, and how the group would be held accountable in terms of implementing this and putting it into practice. Also commending the work. Like there were a lot of great ideas, and it's obvious that there's been a lot of good thought partners and partnership in putting this together.
Thanks, Heather. So one of the things that we do at the APC is we sort of direct questions to the teams and people that have the knowledge of this. And so I'm going to try my best. It's a little better in a physical setting to do that. So I'm gonna call on some people. No offense to the people I'm calling on, just to address some of the concerns. So the first concern was about, one of the major concerns was that there is no sort of permanent backbone entity. And we had a work group, we have a work group that is working around that backbone entity. I want to go to, not to put you on the spot, Diana, but Diana Seeger was a key person that was on that backbone governance structure, along with Joe Jones and Mayor Bliss and some others. And so I just wanted to go to Diana first, maybe Joe and Mayor Bliss and Lee Nelson Weber and other folks that were on there might want to jump in. But, you know, can you address kind of what you guys were thinking, what some of the concerns were, you know, how we got here and just, you know, why we have this sort of interim solution?
Sure. And it is an interim solution, and it is short time frame. The discussion is not unlike the discussion that KConnect had in its early days, and that is if we're really going to be intentional about equity, you need to have not just representation and lip service to the persons who have lived experience. It truly needs to have representation with teeth. And the thing that we've learned over the course of the last few years is the fact that the difference here is that when we're calling for community coordinators to be housed in each housing organization, that those are paid positions. And so that voice is not only at the decision-making table, but that voice is it will be sustainable. And in creation of the interim solution is that the people who are coming to that decision-making table have the power and the authority is at least 40%, as Bandy Bolter had reported. So we really want to be intentional about the design of governance, which is truly the strength of the backbone.
Thank you. This is Kristen Peck. My group also voted yellow, and if I don't cover our concerns, feel free to jump in. But one of our questions was really around the role of the current housing providers with the backbone entity and whether that would be a formal relationship and how they would continue to be able to provide input into that backbone entity and what the would they be involved in the governance? We also had questions about the equity of the housing assessments. And I think we weren't clear if the coordinators would be located at the backbone entity or within each of the housing providers. And so ensuring that either way, that there's equity in those housing assessments and matching of needs with capacities. We also talked about the funding for those housing coordinators. If where is that coming from? Are the individual housing providers expected to come up with funding for that, or is that already is there already a solution for that? So those are some of the questions that we had.
Yeah, I think related to the actual position of the housing coordinator, Bo or Joe, if you could speak to that and how you envision the infrastructure of those positions and the funding, that would be great.
So from the beginning of the Housing Stability Alliance, there have been members from the community that have been asked to participate in a lot of the conversations. We saw that as an extension of what this position would be. A lot of times we talk about mandates for organizations, we talk about diversity and inclusion. We want to really make sure, as I stated, that we make that a belonging space for persons from communities of color. So Black and brown professionals that are in these roles, trained in what it is that we are communicating. So we've developed a curriculum that speaks directly to the language that we use. We've developed a certification, if you will, for those persons from community to be able to then truly engage. But each of the housing organizations should look at these positions internally, and they should fund these positions internally. We cannot depend on the nebulousness of, oh, it would be great to have someone in this position. It has to be a very strong effort from all of those agencies and organizations to have someone that is making a livable wage, that is going to be heard, that is going to be uplifted, that is going to be engaged in all of these decision-making processes. Because if we do not do that in an organizational level and we leave it to outside agencies to keep providing information for free, then are we really being equitable? And are the conversations that we're having around equitable access real? So it's to those organizations to have line items in their budgets for these positions to really move forward. A lot of the information that we received, or a lot of the feedback that we received, that this is not only something that we should engage in with housing. So when we talk about social determinants of health, whether it be at in the health sector, in the education sector, this navigation is something that is very strong and powerful to be able to really engage and connect, to speak to the issues that we're seeing today. And these were conversations that we were having prior to a lot of the unrest that we're seeing here in the demonstrations that we've had across the country. So these are answers and tangible solutions to issues that we're facing nationally.
And also, just for a moment, I want to back up. Heather, can you please restate what you said? Because I think we missed it, and I don't know if your group's question was addressed.
So the concerns that our group had was, that the work was very complex, and, individuals that were new to the work and trying to understand it, it's a lot to digest. So how can the information perhaps be distilled down a bit, also recognizing that it is very complex and this has been a long journey. So not wanting to
understand. So it's
work that's happening. Also, and I think it was specific around timetables too. Like how is this going to be put into practice? While there were a lot of really great ideas, how do we hold ourselves accountable, or whoever is accountable, in understanding kind of the timing and what in practice this will look like more.
Understood. So the first one on communications, Steve Faber, I think you were on the call. Can you address, kind of generally speaking, how the communication of this work could be disseminated down so that people could understand it in digestible kind of bite-sized chunks? And then the second question on the timing or the implementation of it into practice, maybe we'll defer back to Diana or somebody from the Backbone governance team to be able to respond to that. So Steve, can you do the communications piece first?
Sure. So as Mayor Bliss said, we have a communications plan, which is really a roadmap or a framework. The next step of that we identified a couple weeks ago is really developing core messages. And there's a committee that will come together. And the goal there is to, I think, hopefully accomplish what Heather is saying, is to distill this down into some messages that resonate, that can be repeatable, that can be easily digested, again, realizing these are very complex issues. So the framework right now is really laying out that next step of core messages, and then how does that kind of get disseminated to partners so that, again, we're all sort of singing from the same hymn book as we begin to roll this out. So Eureka, is that enough?
Sounds good. Thanks. And then in terms of timeline for implementation, does somebody from the background team want to address that? Dinah, got it.
I believe the date in with regard to the next step with the interim work, I believe was September, and then moving to that. So, but giving us a couple of months to really help develop the governance structure. So.
Right.
I have a specific question that we talked about in my group. It was around living wage versus family living wage. And so we talked about how the wage needed to be enough to be able to support a family. Obviously, with the work that we are doing around homelessness and housing, we don't want that to happen to our coordinators if that were to happen. And then also the support of the coordinators and how are they going to be lifted up? Are the coordinators going to be receiving support from the organizations that they're being assigned to, or will it be through the Community Alliance, or how is that working?
All right. So we have two things going on. I'm kind of also looking at the chat box too. So one is funding, not only funding of the coordinator positions, but there's also a funding question about the backbone entity. I'm not really for sure who's the best person from our group to talk about the funding piece. So maybe I'll punt that to you, Mark, to address how maybe the funding will be addressed for these, the coordinator roles and the backbone entity. And then after that's done, again, Bo or Joe, if you could address her question about the coordinator positions, and that would be great. Mark, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I can air traffic control that question for sure, Eureka. I'd like to go maybe to another person on that backbone team, Mayor Bliss, not to put you on the spot, but I know you've had some conversations about sort of timing and resources along with that sort of backbone entity. So I wonder if you can weigh in to sort of answer that, talk a little bit about that.
She might be frozen.
Yeah, she might be off. Let's see, who else can we go to?
And not.
Okay.
And not.
We may have to send out then a written response to the question about funding after the meeting then to address that question. So that's how the coordinator positions in the backbone entity will be funding. What's the strategy, the approach in order to make sure that it happens? And then you had a second part to your question about the community coordinator positions. Bo or Joe, or I don't see Bo's face anymore, so maybe it's Joe or Santiago. If you could address her question, that would be great.
I would say Bo had to step out, so I don't know if Joe wants to take it.
I guess Santiago, it'll be you.
Sorry, it took me a while to unmute. So as Bo spoke previously, he talked about embedding these positions into each organization. So from my understanding, I apologize, I wasn't at the last meeting. I had a previous engagement. So maybe somebody else who was there can fill that in as well. So from my understanding that they're embedded actually in the organization. So We talk about the equity and building that into each team. So that was my understanding of that conversation. But like I said, I wasn't at the last meeting. So if anybody else kind of understands that differently than myself, please feel free to correct me.
You're muted, Mark.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I'm bad at that. Or good at that. I don't know. So I know. Thank you, Santiago. I know Bo is back, and so Eureka, maybe just recap that question for Bo.
Actually, Candy, you could just restate your question. I'd rather for it to come from you.
Yeah, so the question was around coordinators and supporting those coordinators, and how whether that support would be coming from directly from the HSA or from the organizations they're embedded to. And actually, with what Santiago just said, I guess I have a second part to that question. If the coordinators will be embedded into the organizations, what work will be done around that? So what work will be done to make sure that the coordinators are actually embedded into the organizations and that they're not looked at as an outside entity by other employees of that organization?
The curriculum that we've developed, it's both and for the organization and for the individuals that have been engaged in this process previous to the Hispanic Center. And the Urban League has been a part of this. So as we identify those individuals, as we communicate with them, one of the main things that we wanted to do prior to COVID was hold listening sessions and town halls to identify those persons that we would be engaging in the curriculum that we developed. So once those persons are identified, we would serve as support structures, the Hispanic Center of Western Michigan and the Urban League of West Michigan, being able to then support those persons as they navigate into organizations, as well as organizations that are going to be housing them, working on making sure that there's competency, making sure that they're not left feeling unsupported. That was something that we heard a lot from persons that were previously engaged in this work. So just making sure that there's support structures for both the organizations in these conversations and those individuals to make sure that equity, clear lenses around what it is that the needs are of community are for both organizations and for those individuals to be able to express, and then work through whatever issues that may come about if there's any disengagement from the organizations. So it's a continuous, authentic relationship building as we're all on those different paths towards equity. So as we place someone, as someone is hired into these positions that are being developed, making sure that there is the language, that there is the accessibility, that there's the authenticity in the work, so that no one ever feels disengaged.
We have about 5 minutes left for the discussion, so please ask away a couple more questions and comments we have time for.
This is Erin Banshoff. Our group voted yellow. We spoke about how the document as a whole seems very robust, but that the backbone entity and governance section seems very brief, and it's scaled back from prior versions. Specifically, we'd like to see more detail on the estimated time length for the interim period. How, more specifically, how members of this interim group will be selected or who will serve, and then how Housing Stability Alliance members will continue to be informed and involved during this interim period. Felt like there's a lot of good momentum and didn't want to necessarily stop working or being engaged for a several-month period when there's so much to do.
Would someone from the backbone entity like to address that, Diana?
Erin, quite frankly, we couldn't come to a decision about how the members of this temporary backbone group would be selected. Though we wanted to make sure that, as I said a couple of times, that at least 40% are people who have the lived experience. So there is no concrete answer at this time. As far as timing, I want to wrap this up by September. So, and unless there's anybody, I don't think there's anybody else from the backbone group specifically, if you want to add to that.
So we have Juan Oliveras, we have Mayor Bliss, we have Lori Beard, Becky Reinbrandt, that were all on that backbone entity team. So if there's anybody that wants to sort of jump in and talk a little more about, you know, the urgency around that and what is envisioned, please do so.
All right, let me try this again. Sorry about that. So I'll just add, I'll echo what Diana said. We really wrestled with this, and that's why the recommendation was to move forward in this kind of interim step to really flesh out those details and think through what that future governance looks like. And so I think that is really good feedback. It's valid. I think we wrestled with it as a backbone subcommittee, but we also really feel strongly that we need a backbone. What that looks like in the future really needs to be designed and driven with individuals with lived experience.
Our group voted yellow as well. And just to echo, because Diana referenced lived experience and Mayor Bliss just referenced lived experience, one of the concerns was to ensure that the voice of lived experience is wide and varied, so that we're not getting the voice of one particular group of persons, so that we have the voice of college students who have been living in their cars, or youth who have aged out of foster care, or a parent who has experienced homelessness with their children multiple times throughout different periods and has a varied experience. We want it to be so it's not just representative of you know, a younger person with children who's going through the system, but persons with a wide variety of experience in that homeless space. Also, to have more information about what documents supported the recommendations. There was a concern and a request to have more information about that, and that the anti-racism or the implicit bias training piece include anti-racism, because it's not enough for persons to go through implicit bias training and say, oh, okay, those are my implicit biases, good to know. They need to know how to move forward, what's next in that process, and the anti-racism training is far more expansive and provides more that people can take away and actually use, because it gives them that next step. And also the last thing is tracking system change, to be able to track where people have gone, where the system has moved, how it has moved. That piece is also equally important.
Thank you, Sandra. So we're
Can I go to so one of the things that keeps on coming up in the chat and is the anti-racism training. Deanna Rolfs, can I go to you for around the high leverage activities and how that, you know, anti-racist training was incorporated in the high leverage activities, and then maybe, you know, if there's another member of that group that can also speak to that, feel free to jump in, but you're the one that I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everybody. I also would lean on Christina. I don't know if Lisa is here this morning. There are other members that definitely worked on this as well.
I'm here.
Okay, cool. So I'll just do a quick overview on the PDF. We detailed 4 primary activities, core activities that we suggested. So I believe that's, I'm trying to find the page 10 of your PDF. And it lists many things such as education to service providers, those with elected positional economic power. I won't read all of them, but to embody anti-racism, negate the bootstrap mentality, change public policy, embed in the core of the system people of color with lived experience. And then some of the sub bullets there are around anti-racism. And then the last one, 4 public scorecards, ensuring that we're working to eradicate those racialized outcomes that we see across organizations. So this was something that was incredibly at the center of all of our conversations on the high leverage activities team. So just to reference those, I think would really give you a little bit more breadth and depth. And all of those high leverage activities were focused around addressing some of the root causes that were identified also. So anybody else from the group, Christina?
I would just say that the data is incredibly important in this space. And like Dana said, the scorecards for multiple sectors and being able to hold ourselves accountable to where we want to go. You know, some of the actions may change and evolve as we learn more, but we want the outcomes to be manageably different.
So at this point in time, we're actually out of time for our discussion, but I do want to follow up on the two other things that Sandra listed, if we can have a quick response to these. The first was related to the selection process for lived experience. It's how are people going to be selected, if there was any thought given to that. And then the second one was really around the evaluation of system progress. So on the selection process of people with lived experience, someone from the Hispanic Center or the Urban League, if you could respond. And then on evaluating system progress, if maybe that's probably a Mark response, I'm assuming, or somebody from shared measurement.
Again, we've gone back and looked at those that have been engaged in this work from day one. There was a group that from the beginning of the conversations was engaged. One of the persons that we identified was Kayla Morgan, who is a community member, a longtime member of this group. And we've also looked into our communities here at the center, and spoken to a lot of community members, and those that we see have those processes. Eleanor Moreno, who is a part of the community, who's spoken on these issues of homelessness and housing for a very long time, are those kinds of the persons that we are identifying as being able to speak to this with fidelity and authenticity. So those are the types of engagement opportunities that we have for people in the community.
Thank you. And then on the system evaluation, measuring the progress, Mark, can you respond to that quickly?
Yeah, I'm gonna call on my shared measurement team here. So I'm looking at Jim Talon out there. Jim, are you there? Would you like to speak into sort of how the Housing Alliance will be sort of tracking progress around the system?
Wow, that was a handoff, Mark. Unexpected. I feel like we put together it was a lot of work, but put together some great measurements. And the challenge was to identify those for the 7 different kind of stages that we're looking at on the spectrum. But the intention is to put that together into regular tracking of how we're doing on those particular measurements, and something that we haven't done well as a community. But if we continue to have those in front of us, what we know is what we measure is what we're going to be working on and paying attention to. So I think we've got some good areas that we're tracking, and that will give us a good evaluation of how the system is doing, working or not.
Sounds great. I know we have a couple of other questions maybe in the chat box that we're not going to have time to respond to directly right now. But we just want to know that we will address them as we move forward with the Housing Stability Alliance and incorporate that into the thinking either of the action teams or the backbone entity moving forward. So we really do appreciate all of your feedback and your input at this time. And the door is always open for you to continue to speak into and to shape this work moving forward, because we want to always reiterate, this is the starting point of the common agenda and not the end of the road. So always the door is open. Now we're going to enter into round 2 of our discussion and voting protocol. Round 2 is basically just to see if our comments or your comments and questions were addressed in order to earn or to strengthen your affirmation or support of the recommendation of the common agenda and roadmap that's been brought forth today. So we're going to put you back into your breakout groups for about 8 to 10 minutes, and then we'll see you back here in the large group in just a few moments. So enjoy your breakout discussions. We'll put you in those groups now. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back again. We are now ready for our report out from our table captains on our second and final group vote for the morning. So table captains, if you will prepare to enter your votes, and please be mindful that at this point, only the table captain should be using the chat box. So table captains, if your groups voted green, please indicate green by typing it in the chat box now. If your groups voted yellow, please type yellow in the chat box now. And if your groups voted red, please type red in the chat box now. Okay, I believe we have all the group votes in. And now it's time for us to conclude the voting protocol with your individual vote. And just a moment, my screen is messed up. All right, so we're concluding the voting protocol with your individual vote. For the individual vote, you only have one instruction, and that one instruction is to please wait until you hear me call your color before you enter it into the chat box. So that's all. Just wait until you hear me say green if you're voting green before you enter it, for example. And so now it's time for you to vote. So get ready your fingers. If you're voting green to affirm and support the recommendation as is, please type green in the chat box now. So if you're affirming and supporting the recommendation as is, as an individual, please type green in the chat box now. Now, if you are voting yellow to affirm and support the recommendation with refinements that will address your concerns, please type yellow in the chat box now. So again, if you're voting yellow to affirm and support the recommendation with refinements that will address your concerns, type yellow now. And if you're voting red to indicate that there are no refinements that can be made to address your concerns, please type red now. So red means there are no refinements that could be made to address your concerns. And if you haven't cast your vote and you would like to do so now, please cast it yellow, red, or green. Once again, we are proud of our work as a Housing Stability Alliance, and moreover, the work of KConnect as a whole. We'll be reporting out the group votes at the end of the meeting, so you'll be able to see the results then. But from a scan in the chat box, it looks like the recommendation will move forward of the common agenda and roadmap as it is presented, with refinements that will be made from the group question and comments period. Once again, thank you for your participation. Voting is always important, whether it be in KConnect or for your country. We want to celebrate now, so go to that reactions. Make sure you clap or give a thumbs up for our voting experience today. We'd like to see your participation. Can we get a reaction from everybody? Or you can just wave or snap or do something to interact with us. And then now we'll spend a little bit of time taking a break. You'll have 5 minutes on the clock.
please take a break, and then we'll come back and hear from the prenatal to third grade work group. Thank you very much.
Okay, are we ready to get back at it? I'm looking for Mark or Anissa or somebody to nod at me.
Go ahead, Krista.
All right, all right. We'll keep it moving. So the KConnect network was activated in new ways to respond to the needs of our community's housing system, but this work was not beyond the scope of our work plan. The foundation of the work plan is home and family stability, and housing is a key part of the basic needs all families require. The work that has been accomplished through the Housing Stability Alliance has strengthened our foundation, which in turn strengthens the work across the entire prenatal to career continuum. Now that housing work is transitioning beyond KConnect, the network's focus will return to the core domains of prenatal to third grade, 4th through 12th, and high school to career as we work together toward our end in mind that was highlighted in the November 2018 APC. That seems like a really long time ago. To demonstrate how this journey unfolds, we are excited to highlight KConnect's first strategy that has reached the pilot phase, the Birth Equity Through Doulas of Color strategy that has come from the prenatal to third grade work group, also known as PN3. I have had the privilege of serving as co-chair for the PN3 work group since 2014. I'm transitioning out of that position to focus on my role as a KConnect trustee, but I have full confidence in the remaining PN3 co-chairs who will continue to lead in that domain. And at this time, I will hand the PN3 update presentation over to them, Dr. Nkechi Eze and Christina Donaldson.
Good morning, everyone. Soon to be afternoon. Dr. Nkechi, are you there? Do we know, is she on the line with us?
I'm looking.
Okay. I haven't seen her.
You want to just go ahead, Christina?
Yeah. All right. So I'll just jump in here. So thank you, Krista. So myself and Dr. Nkechi both serve, as well as Krista, both serve as PN3 co-chairs. And we have been excited to see the momentum continue to build in early childhood. When the APC last gathered this past November, we were celebrating a big win with the passage of the Ready by 5 early childhood millage. Since then, the millage has been awarded nearly $10 million in funding to 17 organizations and 27 programs. In addition, we have had Anissa Eddy in her role as a Pritzker Fellow for the past 18 months, bringing added leadership capacity to our early childhood systems work and connecting our efforts to state and national initiatives. We also saw the launch of a countywide shared services pilot project that is designed to support and strengthen our local childcare sector. These are just a few of the many successes our community has seen in recent months. Yet we are also experiencing significant disruptions in our work due to COVID-19. So when the PN3 work group convened in January, we were excited to center our 2020 work on the goal of bridging authentic community and family engagement with early childhood systems work to support increased equitable outcomes in our work plan indicators. We made plans to adjust our meeting times to be later in the day to include dinner and childcare. We envisioned more in-person connections with parents, families, and children in our system building work this year. But due to COVID-19, it has brought an abrupt need to shift and pivot. The PN3 work group convened virtually to activate our role as a resource hub, sharing information and ideas with one another and illuminating opportunities to collaborate and be innovative together. We had to put up this awkward photo of our virtual meeting because we know that you all can relate. In addition, we found 4 priorities to elevate across all early childhood systems amid COVID-19 response. Amid the COVID-19 response, response effects that connect to the early childhood system. These priorities are listed on your screen, and corresponding tools are included in the PN3 workgroup update document that you should have received in advance of the meeting. These priorities are listening to families, embed equity, elevate social emotional wellness, and also to prioritize two-generational approaches. As we navigate new realities, adjusted timelines, and countless uncertainties, we are grateful for the inaugural strategies that we are still moving forward. The birth equity team, through the Doulas of Color pilot, aims to close disparity gaps in birth outcomes and increase access to culturally responsive care through the diversification of the healthcare workforce. COVID-19 has magnified the need for such strategies. This presentation that we will share now provides a deeper overview of the strategies and models, how it will progress through the KConnect process. And I will hand this over to, I believe, Kiara Baskin, who is going to walk us through what the doula strategy presentation will be.
Thank you so much, Christina. I'm actually going to jump in here. I think we are definitely experiencing some internet issues for our various folks, but we are moving forward. And I'm really pleased to present this video to all of you that reflects the work that the Birth Equity Strategy team has done. And many of you were able to hear about this strategy at a previous APC. So you'll see this video and it'll walk alongside the journey map that is the process that all KConnect systemic strategies will follow. And so I hope that as you're watching this, you can think about how other aspects of our work might follow along the same path. Okay, folks, I'm just going to try to play it right from YouTube. Thank you for your patience.
I know to share videos in Zoom, when you go to share your screen, there's a button that says advanced. And then you can share a section of your screen and you will highlight the video, but you have to check the share sound box as well. That's on the bottom left when the advanced box pops up.
The KConnect network exists to ensure that all children in Kent County have an equitable path to economic prosperity through family, quality education, and community supports. Success measures and indicators have been identified to help the community understand the current state and measure the impact of our collective work. Our first success measure on the Cradle to Career Continuum is kindergarten readiness, and the first indicator connected to kindergarten readiness is born healthy. The KConnect Journey Map demonstrates the process that the work groups follow to plan and activate systemic strategies aimed at improving each indicator and disrupting disparities. Starting at the measure phase, the prenatal to third grade work group recognized a significant disparity in the birth outcomes for Black mothers. In Kent County, Black mothers are more than twice as likely to have a low birth weight baby when compared to their white peers. This data informed the decision to develop a targeted strategy that would address this glaring inequity. The next phase is engage. In 2017, KConnect convened local stakeholders, including doulas of color, midwives, and partners from education, healthcare, early childhood, and workforce development. This group evolved into the Birth Equity Strategy Team. In the Activate phase, the Birth Equity Strategy Team solicited feedback from local doulas, parents, and community stakeholders. The input gathered was organized into a strategy proposal that was presented to KConnect's Accountability Partners Council in 2018. After being affirmed by the Accountability Partners Council, the work moved into the build phase. In this phase, the Birth Equity through Doulas of Color strategy was refined and organized as a program pilot with formalized partnerships. Baxter Community Center has agreed to incubate the pilot, and Health Connect One will serve as our national consultant for training and technical assistance. Strong Beginnings agreed to be the primary referral partner, and Mercy Health St. Mary's will be the healthcare system partner. The Heart of West Michigan United Way will serve as the fiduciary. This array of cross-sector partners collaborating to improve a countywide outcome is a prime example of collective impact at work. At this time, the strategy is entering the try phase. The Birth Equity Strategy Team was successful with its first 2 funding requests and was awarded a total of $190,000 from the Steelcase Foundation and the Michigan Health Endowment Fund, which will be distributed over a 3-year period. The Birth Equity Strategy Team will be posting a program manager position in June 2020, and the pilot will launch by August. The next phase is evaluate. Although the initial pilot is designed as a program, it will be implemented and evaluated within a systems framework. The strategy not only aims to increase the number of trained doulas of color and improve access to doula services for women of color in our community, but it also aims to close disparity gaps through diversification of the healthcare workforce and increasing access to culturally responsive health services in Kent County. Proponents LLC will be the third-party evaluation partner for the pilot, and they bring significant program evaluation experience and a strong systems approach to their work. The reach phase is designed to expand and scale systemic strategies that demonstrate measurable success in increasing equitable outcomes. If the 3-year Birth Equity through Doulas of Color pilot is successful, the program will be implemented and scaled in other parts of the community,
and the systems level learnings will be shared across our healthcare systems. The final phase is transform. Ultimately, KConnect seeks to create equitable outcomes, eliminate disparity gaps, and effect sustainable systems change. That is the goal of the Birth Equity Through Doulas of Color pilot, and it is the goal of all of KConnect's work across the cradle to career continuum. Thank you for being a part of this journey.
Thanks so much for your patience on that. So just again, I want to thank the Birth Equity Strategy team that has been working on this. They've been meeting consistently and moving this forward. I know the APC's only seen glimpses, but we've just been so grateful to see so many partners come around the table. First Steps Kent, the Kent County Essential Needs Task Force, Health Connect One, Strong Beginnings, Baxter Community Center, Mercy Health St. Mary's, West Michigan Midwifery, Proponents LLC, and the Heart of West Michigan United Way, as well as the numerous doulas of color that have come around this table and helped to build this. So we will keep you updated, but we are so excited that this is moving forward. And we're really thankful to the foundations that still moved forward with the funding as well, even in the midst of COVID. One of the things that we told them was, with all the things we don't know, one thing we know for sure is that babies are going to keep being born. And we already know that there was disparities in the system that have only been illuminated further through this crisis. And so we're very, very grateful to see this moving forward in our community. And I'll turn it back to Krista.
Okay. So the doula strategy represents the model for KConnect's work ahead. With the indicators identified, KConnect will now shift to a focus on strategies with community engagement at the center. Align and design teams, such as the Birth Equity Strategy team, are teams that are working to improve success measures and indicators. They can be committees of the domain work group or teams convened by other community partners. The teams will typically be comprised of 10 to 12 individuals with an eye toward geographic focus, cross-sector engagement, voice of impacted lives, inclusion, equity, professional expertise, and where applicable, the youth voice. While the Align and Design teams do this indicator-specific work groups will shift into becoming a resource hub, a sounding board, a barrier buster. As the work progresses, you'll see that everyone has a role to play. We are now going to turn it over to Kathy Glenn, PN3's facilitator, to facilitate a group discussion. Kathy.
Thank you, Krista. So we have a question that we're going to put on the slide here for you in just a minute. And it's really an opportunity for all of us to reflect a little bit on what we heard and saw today in terms of the presentation from the housing group and what we saw from the doulas group. And so the question that we have, and we're not going to be moving into breakout rooms. We're going to be doing this as one large group. Feel free to unmute yourself to answer the question or to use the chat box to chat your response. But the question is, what did you glean from these two presentations that will benefit the systems work of your organization or your work group? So again, just take a minute to reflect on that question. I know I'm feeling very full right now in terms of all of the great information that I received today about these two programs. But in order for us to really move the work forward, it's helpful for us to think about how can I take what I learned today and embed it into my organization, my work group. If you're part of KConnect in the different work groups, is there a way we can take this and embed it in our work groups? Is there a way we can take something that we've gleaned and bring it back to our organization? So I'm going to be monitoring chat to see some of the responses that might come through. And again, feel free to unmute yourself. So policy support of doulas and other policy, and Jamie has given us a link for that. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. That is our Right Start report, and really looking at getting a right start for children being born, and getting reimbursement through healthcare insurances for doulas is one of the policy recommendations that we put in there as well. So absolutely, and there's other policy recommendations in there as well, but that was a big one.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Jamie. Mandy is talking about the call for community-wide action in which each of us plays a role to carry out and carry on the work. And I also appreciate that there are roles for strengths and learnings in each of these spaces. Anissa, you have mentioned that it's great to see a real strategy move through the journey map. It helps to imagine how other strategies can progress in a similar way. I'm seeing a lot of affirmation on that. As part of the PN3 work group, I can echo that. It's a long, hard journey, but definitely worth it. Let's see what else we have coming in. And again, feel free to unmute yourself.
I have a question. I have a comment, Kathy.
Yes, please.
This is Melinda Sassi. Thank you, and thank you for that video. One of the things I guess that I'm thinking about as we have this question posed to us is when we think about the Born Healthy strategies and we think about the importance of relationships with parents and with their newborns. What has COVID presented this opportunity where individuals are working from home? There's a lot more discussions about flexibility and work. I know we've done some different, we had some people working like 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. and then they took a break almost like 6 hours in the day and then did evening schedules. And that was to support our clients because we had so many unemployment claims during this time. So, some of my feedback, I guess, and I just wonder what others have experienced is how can we, in our organizations that, many of us typically do run an 8 to 5 schedule, but how can we adjust differently to support, a lot of these Born Healthy strategies and what might be most accessible to families, in 0 to 5. So I don't know. I don't really have an answer. I don't have a suggestion other than that's what I've been thinking about and how I might apply it to my organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Mindy. Would others like to weigh in on that as well? I'm seeing some things come through on chat too. Some great comments coming through on the chat. And again, feel free to unmute yourself and, add to the conversation or join into the conversation of what Mindy put out there or perhaps what you're seeing in the chat as well.
Yeah, I'll respond to Melinda's comment. I think there is such an amazing opportunity right now to actually harness what we talk about a lot with system redesign, because we're being forced to be a lot more creative. And I think we're seeing examples of what maybe seemed impossible or less productive actually working quite well. So I know in the early childhood space, we're looking at childcare specifically as an industry that can be reopened and rebuilt in a much more sustainable way, and putting together some very specific policy recommendations for the county and the state to advocate for that, because we do have an invitation to lean in and make some changes that we've been kind of talking about or dreaming about for a long time. So although it's just a huge crisis overall with COVID, there are some pieces of good that can come out of the opportunities we have right now for some very significant transformational systems change.
Thank you for that, Anissa. Well, it looks like the chat has slowed down a little bit in terms of some of the comments that people have made. I'm seeing from Kelly, housing stability allows students to have a more stable learning environment. Holly is talking about the focus on equitable access to these services is foundational for impacting a child's ability to learn. Mike is asking a question about how might doulas be empowered or trained to help new moms better understand the support language development with newborns. Seeing some affirmation in terms of Melinda's comments. So thank you all for that.
I'd like to add, I think that this can be a wonderful opportunity. This is Tom Cottrell from the YWCA. We know that domestic violence tends to escalate around pregnancy and childbirth. And if doulas are in a position to be a support for those moms or help them identify family dynamics that can cause stress and anxiety for newborns, that can, I think, further opportunities for healthy development of children if some of those family dynamics can be identified early on with another set of eyes on a household. If we can contribute to that in any way, we'd love to in terms of training or any other awareness building that we can do.
Great, thank you for that connection, Tom.
I have a question. Is there any prospect for linking a broader infrastructure for personal support and professional development between doulas of color and the community coordinators we were talking about in the last conversation? The sense of a community building environment?
It's an interesting thought, Neil, and maybe one that needs to be further explored now that you've brought that to the forefront. I don't know if there's anybody from the doula program that would like to comment on that. Christina or others?
Can you repeat your question again, Neil?
Sure, I'm just remembering the conversation about trying to, as Bo kept putting it, create a sense of belonging and empowerment and authority for people with lived experience from the communities we're trying to assist. Whether the doulas of color themselves form another cohort that should have wraparound experiences that might require the same kind of infrastructure and empowerment and professional development that would apply to the coordinators on the housing side.
I don't know that I would have a full answer to that. What I can say is one of the things that has been talked about and discussed is really being able to provide support to moms during pregnancy, but also post-pregnancy as well. And being able to be that listening ear and support for those moms. As far as professional development, what that looks like, I, again, don't have the answer to that. Maybe Anissa can jump in and touch base on that. I don't think that that's something that we have thought through as far as providing professional development for outside of the training that is going to be needed and necessary and required for the doulas. But in addition to that, I don't know whether or not that is something that we have planned for.
Well, let me interject real quick. I want to be really clear too that in the past, professional development has too often been a code word for becoming more like the white class, the white middle class. And if there's a way of phrasing what I'm saying, is there an opportunity here to create a professional development for people of color that is truly their own?
Yeah, thanks for that, Neil. I think that is a great comment, and we can certainly bring that to the strategy team. I know that our hope is that this will evolve into more of a cohort of local doulas of color, and that as more and more are trained, they can be that resource with each other. And this model that will be incubated at Baxter is definitely meant to support whatever career path works and makes the most sense for the doula. So some may be in community-based organizations, some might be in hospital systems, some might be more entrepreneurial in the way that they pursue it. And so I do think there's a natural relationship to being embedded in these different places and different settings, and then coming together to coordinate across systems and provide that navigation and some of that support to elevate the things overall. So it does have some overlap with the cultural navigators in the housing work, and I think it has some really great promise to keep us interconnected in this space.
Thank you.
Janice, I actually have a question, just because a lot of people can't afford doulas. So I'm curious for those that are, is there funding to help people being able to access that until Medicaid decides to cover it?
Yeah, that's a great point. And that was definitely built into the pilot and the funding requests in the budget. So there will be a stipend paid for the doulas to go through the training, as well as for their services. And it will be covered, so it will be free of charge in this pilot for the moms. We're hoping that our really strong evaluation framework will give us further evidence to be going towards those bigger policy changes with inclusion of Medicaid and even some of our insurance parties, because we know that there's research that there's a great benefit, and adding local data I think will make that advocacy stronger, because we don't want cost to be a barrier. So that's for sure part of it.
Fantastic. And I'll just add again that we support that at MLPP. So we're advocating for Medicaid to cover that. And obviously we would want private insurers to do the same.
So this is amazing discussion, and I hate to cut it off, but we're going to have to move on. But what I want to suggest is, if you have comments or questions or suggestions or ideas, especially for the doula group, and I'm seeing some things come through on chat in terms of some suggestions and lessons learned and things. So type those into chat, and we will make sure that we save that and we forward it on to the group for consideration as they begin to pilot this program. But right now, I want to turn it over to the PN3 co-chairs for our wrap up. So thank you, everybody.
Christina, can you jump in again?
I know I've seen Krista on there as well. All right, well, that's okay. Thank you, Kathy, for the additional information and the progress in reference to the activities related to PN3. Please see the PN3 workgroup update document that was sent out last week. It should also be in a link within the chat box. As Kristen, as was mentioned earlier, Kristen will be transitioning out of her role as the PN3 co-chair. PN3 was one of the first KConnect work groups to launch in 2014, and Krista has been there nearly from the beginning. She did not come with an early childhood background, and her outside perspective pushed us to better articulate and refine our work with a cross-sector lens. So Krista, we want to just say thank you to you for your commitment, for your leadership, and for the time that you have given to this work. We ask that you use the chat box now to please make any comments or express any thanks of your own as we share a memory of working with Krista over these last several years. So with Krista's transition, Dr. Nkechi and I are looking for a new co-chair to join our leading PN3 work group, and we want your help. Okay, so on the screen, you will see a list of competencies that we would hope to see in our next co-chair and the responsibilities associated with the role. If you know someone who demonstrates these competencies, we encourage you to consider nominating them for this PN3 co-chair position. We just shared a simple nomination form in the chat room, and I believe that will be shared if it has not already been shared. And this would also include, we will also include in it the follow-up communication after this meeting. So again, if you have someone in mind that you would like to recommend, please send those recommendations. And at this time, I'm just going to hand it back over to Dr. Lovelady Mitchell. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
Yes,
and thank you, Krista.
In addition to transitioning from a PN3 co-chair, Krista will also be transitioning off as an APC co-chair. She's been through 5 APCs and has done great work in planning these network convenings that bring together cross-sector leaders to accomplish all that has been completed over the past couple of years. She will be continuing her work with KConnect on the Board of Trustees. Please join me in thanking her for her work. And Krista, would you like to take a couple minutes and say a few words?
Oh my gosh, the comments are overwhelming. Thank you, everybody. All I really want to say is how lucky I am that my personal and career paths kind of brought me to KConnect. I'm so grateful to all of you in this network for pulling me along on a journey that I didn't even know I needed to be on. So it's been fantastic. I've learned so much from many of you. I've laughed and cried with many of you. And I'm not going anywhere. So we need to make room for other leaders to step into these roles and see where they take us on the next phase. But I'm still actively engaged and hope to continue to learn and grow with all of you. So thank you for allowing me to be part of the PN3 and APC leadership team for so long. I'm truly blessed. Thank you.
Is there an evaluation that somebody wants to tee up?
Yes, we'll put it in the chat.
Okay. So the Backbone team is going to add a link to the chat that we strongly encourage you to complete to help us shape future interactions. And at this time, I just want to pause and also thank you for your time today. We know that time is a commodity and that long meetings on Zoom can be exhausting. So at this time, I'd like to ask you to complete the APC evaluation that has been linked in the chat. We value your feedback and encourage you to include comments. Please take the next few minutes to complete the evaluation.
All right. Katie, do we have the results ready to put up on the screen? We do. All right. Okay, so here are the results from today's decision-making protocol around the Housing Stability Alliance work. Looks like we had 50 greens, 26 yellows, on many comments to go along with those. So that's fantastic. Thank you. So this morning, to recap, we heard from the Black Impact Collaborative around their important work and how the KConnect network can collaborate with them. We heard from the Michigan League for Public Policy on ways that the KConnect network can get involved in developing policy tools, and we heard about needed advocacy around the state's budget. We affirmed the Housing Stability Alliance's overview of the Common Agenda and Roadmap. And we heard from the prenatal to third grade work group about their work in the early childhood space.
So thank you again for attending today. We want to remind you to save the date for the November APC, which is scheduled for Friday, November 13th, 2020. Also, please stay after this meeting to take a few minutes to say goodbye to KConnect's first president, Pam Perriott. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.